So let's jump into one of these conspiracy theories, but yet, as we see, is coming to fruition, and that is the Agenda 21 or the Agenda 2030. You discuss those in here, talking about again the timetable. We know that Satan. Even 1 John 2, we see the word Antichrist appears there. So he says the Antichrist is already working. The spirit of the Antichrist, the mystery of lawlessness is already working in 2 Thessalonians 2. So we have that already working, certainly from Genesis 3, but in the time of Jesus, in the time of Paul. So he's been working at this for a long time, waiting for his opportunity. So let's talk about those two phrases, Agenda 21, Agenda 2030. Where do they come from?
Yeah, so Agenda 21 came about as a result of a conference in Rio de Janeiro. It was a climate summit in 1992 during the Clinton era. And they set forth Agenda 21, which was a set of standards and goals that they wanted to institute globally by the 21st century. That's where the 21 comes from. A lot of people who don't really look into it think 21 means the year 2021, but it's really a reference to the 21st century. And then in 2015, well into the 21st century now, they had another meeting in which they set forth Agenda 2030, where in the next 15 years from that point on, they wanted to roll out these sustainable development goals. But all of them are kind of coalescing under the concept of a one world system that everyone has to give up national sovereignty, every country, make themselves accountable to a global governance of some kind, and come under their authority. And we see a number of things that have happened since 2015 to move that agenda forward. The World Health Organization has put out new international health regulations. They've put out, most recently a new document that they're wanting everyone to come on board that would allow, and America's going to come on board, that would allow NATO troops to come into countries unhindered and take control if there's a pandemic and, put troops on the ground. We see the World Economic Forum, that was started by, the Club of Rome, ultimately, if you look at the backstory there. You see a lot of these world, world organizations that are all coming together to pave the way for a one world system. Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030 are kind of at the tip of the spear, and the real driving factor behind those, at least according to the official narrative, is climate change and this alleged existential threat that, because, you drive a car or your cows don't wear masks or something like that, we need to, change the world and create these 15-minute cities to save the planet. And unfortunately, a lot of scientists have bought into the lie, and it's working, and a lot of countries have signed on to Agenda 2030.
Yeah, I always like to preface that we get accused, say we, just whatever, Christians. Do I believe that? No, I always tell people, hear me carefully. Do I believe that that the climate has changed? Yes, I do, absolutely. If you look, I have no problem looking at the pictures of glaciers not being there anymore. Okay, but I also look at history, scientific history, geological history, where if you ask anybody, do you believe that there was an ice age? Well, obviously there's evidence of an ice age. So that right there, the climate has changed. The real issue is who's responsible. See, that's the key, is in the current environment, what they're after is humans are responsible, carbon footprints, et cetera, industrious, in the Industrial Revolution. You're like, okay, I don't believe in that, not at all. I think that there's been evidence coming out of Israel, very well-known physicists came out and said, climate change, yeah, of course the climate change, but it's not human caused. Look at the sun, and he was saying, look at all the evidence of how the sun, and if you do the calculations of per cubic meter of the sun's wattage and the heat, one little bit of change, I mean, there's no greater influence on climate of the earth than the sun. Who would disagree with that?
Yeah.
And so here we are. He said it's not found in human cause, but that what they want to do is they use it now to become this religion, and then to force people to be taxed or to be punished. And I think, okay, you want to give me a carbon tax? Where's that money going? And let's say I'm giving it straight to some global government. What are they doing? Why would my money go to them, and how are they reducing it except punishing people? So what are they doing with all this cash?
Yeah, there have been lots of studies that have shown that it's really a big Ponzi scheme, really, for the globalists to get richer. But that's one of the things I love about the way your mind works, Bondo, is you have a real analytical mind, and you're saying, let's just not use phrases and catchphrases and hastily dismiss things and use loaded terms. Let's just drill down to the facts. So the issue with climate change is it anthropogenic?
Yep.
And by the way, I think not in the way most people use that term. I think some of it is anthropogenic in the sense of what the Luciferian elite are doing in the geoengineering realm, but that's another subject for another day. But, absolutely, it's all about control. Like you mentioned, carbon credits. It's never about what it's about with the Luciferians. They have an agenda. And that agenda, we are learning more and more, is about full spectrum planetary control. And it's not just transactional in terms of the monetary system, like carbon credits, and you might not be able to buy or sell. It's about tracking where you travel, what you eat, who you can spend time with, where you can live. It's full spectrum planetary control. And carbon credits are just part of it. Social credits are part of it. You name it. So that's why I've been really sounding the alarm on the digital currency for quite a while now. I've had the privilege to speak at a couple of conferences on it, some Turning Point USA, a Turning Point USA regional conference and things like that, where it's happening fast. I mean, FedNow is being rolled out in July. That's the backbone architecturally.
Let's talk about that. Explain for those that don't know. I mean, it's coming up this summer. They're saying it's. So let's talk about FedNow. What is it? And let's talk about some of the ramifications.
Yeah, so FedNow is what the Federal Reserve, which is the privately owned central bank that America is beholden to, is going to roll out. That will be the backbone, technological architecture to allow central bank digital currencies.
Infrastructure, basically.
Yeah, the infrastructure, exactly. So what does that look like? Well, right now, when you have a transaction, whether it's a EFT transfer or even a wire transfer, or of course a check or something, it's not instant. It takes, even a wire transfer can take
a couple days.
Yeah, sometimes, or hours. We've bought and sold 12 houses in our married life. And, when you're sitting there at the closing table, sometimes you have to wait for the funds to clear.
Right.
So before they'll give you the keys to the house, or before you'll get your check if you're selling your house. And so you sometimes have to wait 2 or 3 hours, even though it's a wire transfer. Well, with the FedNow system, now everything will be instant. And so literally in the split second that you make a transaction, the funds are available. And that's necessary for the full spectrum tracking that they're going to need with the digital currency, because if they're going to use your digital ID, which is tied to the digital currency, to stop you at a border crossing, or to stop you at a cash register if you're making a purchase and they want to control that, hey, you've already had your meat allotment for this week, you can't buy that. They don't have time to wait hours or whatever for everything to come. It's all got to be instantaneous. And so really think of the FedNow as the tool that Satan and the Antichrist are going to use someday to implement the Romans 13 mark of the beast. He can't see everything at once, so he doesn't have time to always run algorithms and like they do now, where they can kind of check up on you and come back on you. It all needs to be instant. And so that's really what the FedNow is going to do. So it's definitely happening fast.
Yeah, we certainly see some of that already as it relates to credit cards, because I watch Capital One is, hey, by the way, you're there at the store, you buy something, and then it dink, and it says, did you make this purchase? You hit yes, and then it clears it. So you have that's relatively instantaneous in the credit card, as well as maybe denying, hey, you went over your limit, it rejected, declined. But now getting into some of the more non-credit, the instantaneous debit cards or whatever, we see this too. I mean, I think people need to understand, and many who are on maybe food stamps, that there's limits. It's programmed. You're programmed in there that you can't buy alcohol, cigarettes, some of the contraband, so to speak, that you're only allowed certain purchases. So the systems are already there to come. And so with the FedNow coming in, the Federal Reserve, here we are. And I think, let's talk about that for a minute, is my impression is that it's going to be implemented first with those that are already dependent on the government, Social Security. Can you imagine somebody who is held hostage by maybe a direct deposit, or maybe they get a check in the mail from Social Security, like, this is the only way, take it or leave it. Well, you get a whole host of people now are going to be automatically enrolled in this sort of system, and they can't say no.
Yeah. It's going to be coercion. So, people tend to always think in terms of extremes, and they go, oh, they're going to put a gun to my head and make me sign up for the digital currency. No, they won't necessarily have to do that. Certainly not initially. They'll just tie your EBT or your, tax refund or your Social Security checks, all of these entitlements, they'll tie those to it. And they'll say, if you want to continue getting those, this is the only way we're doing it.
Yep.
This is the only way you can pay your taxes. This is the only way you can pay your mortgage. So they're gonna coerce people to do it. And we saw this plan. This is like same song, second verse. We saw this rolled out with the gene-altering bioinjections. And I know we're trying not to get censored here, but let's face it. Think back to when they rolled out the we'll just call it the vaccine, like they called it. They used the carrot first. Hey, get a free lottery ticket if you get this, or get some free marijuana, or we'll give you a $50 check. And then as we have, I have quotes of these in some of my materials. Politicians were out there saying, and newscasters were out there saying, well, the carrot isn't really working. We got to move to the stick now.
Yep.
So
our
now
patience is running thin. Or is worn out, or whatever.
Yeah, totally. And so now it's like, well, you got to do it or you get fired. You got to do it or you can't go to the hospital. You got to do it, you can't serve in the military. So it's this carrot stick, and they're going to do the same thing because Satan's not creative. He uses the same tired old MO. They're going to do the same thing, I think, with a digital ID.
So let's talk some practical things. That a digital, the FedNow is not the mark of the beast. Now, we're very clear that these are laying the foundations for the mark of the beast and the infrastructure for what will come subsequently. We don't know how long. So let's say that, Aunt Mary, loves the Lord, loves Jesus, lives on Social Security. She's in the church. And she's like, hey, Pastor, they said I have to sign up for this digital system in order to get my money. Is she sinning by doing that?
Yeah, I don't think it's a moral issue, personally. I would strongly advise against it. I would say under no circumstances should any Christian do it. And I said the same thing about the vaccine. But I know people who did. And each person has to make their own decision. And it's a tough decision. I get it. I'm not saying it's a flippant and easy decision. Moral decisions are easy.
Yeah.
But this is more of a wisdom. It's more of a what's the impact of it. I don't think that I would say it's a sin in and of itself to do it. But I think people need to really think seriously about it, because once you sign up for the digital ID, and that's really what we're talking about, not the digital currency. The digital currency is a subset of the digital ID in the same way that the vaccine passports were a subset of a digital ID. They've been toying with this global digital ID forever. You see it with things like the Clear technology, with the TSA PreCheck and Clear and stuff. You see it all over the place with international global ID cards if you travel internationally. So all of these things are sort of wheels spinning off their axis that are going to kind of come together and align under one central digital ID. So, I would say people need to think very seriously about it, because it's one thing for them to track your smartphone or track through your smart meters, or track, through your travel through Google Maps and things like that. That's bad enough. But when you make it easy for them by signing up to this digital ID, it's game over. I mean, they've got you. Now, it doesn't mean you can't still jump off the grid at some point.
See, that's
a lot harder.
That's the challenges I think about, because, I mean, again, as a pastor, this, where the church doesn't. If I was to tell her, nope, like you said, it's a moral issue, you're sinning. Well, then what does she do? Well, the church doesn't have enough money to start giving guaranteed income. And so that's the challenge is what do we tell Aunt Mary? We say, well, pray about it. But in reality, she has no choice. I mean, in one sense, she would have no choice from a practical perspective to partake in order just to live. Well, I mean, what other options?
Yeah,
Let's be
so-
real. What other options does she have?
I mean, I think it's really an interesting discussion, because I think the choices are there, but they're not enviable at all.
Yeah,
And they're
yeah.
very, very tough. Same thing with the vaccine. I mean, I did a podcast back during the throes of the pandemic, should Christians take the vaccine? And again, not a moral issue per se, but
Per se.
Yeah, right. I mean,
Yeah,
we'll
could
save
have,
that discussion.
Exactly. I have
Yeah.
strong opinions on that per
Yeah.
se, but
I mean, people would call in and say, well, my mother or my grandmother is dying and they won't let me in to say my goodbye.
yeah,
Or I'm a missionary and I've been going to Peru for 20 years, but now I can't go share Christ with people over there. All these scenarios. And each one of them, I said, doesn't matter. I mean, to me, there's a line in sin. God is bigger than that. He can find a way for the gospel to get to those people. So you may have to suffer. So same thing with the digital ID. We're not promised that it'll be easy to do the right thing. And by right, I mean the wise thing, not necessarily the moral issue. But I think, there are fates worse than that. And if you take the easy road out, and a lot of people did, but I know a lot of people who, at great personal cost, lost their jobs, took early retirement. I know a guy that was 1 year away from his 20-year mark in the military, in the Navy. He retired because back then they were requiring it.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and
So-
they changed. Oh,
Yeah,
whoops,
it's
not required anymore.
Yeah, and then they don't grandfather it in. That's
exactly.
the sad part.
Yeah,
But yeah, I mean, these are tough issues. But I think if you really study, don't wait till you're forced to make the decision. Study it now. Look at the implications of this global digital tracking system. It's never about what it's about. It's not just about paying your taxes or getting your paycheck or getting your Social Security. It's a way more than that.
It's when we look long term, again, these systems, what people need to know is these systems, they are being put in place now so that when the finality of the B system comes into play, all the technology, all the infrastructure, all the conditioning has already been done for many years. And so he comes in on a system that's already advanced. He just takes advantage of it.
Yeah, and we see, you're right, the stage is being set. We see that already with Venmo and Cash App and the instantaneous things like that. We were stopped at a garage sale, kind of ad hoc the other day, Wendy and I I used up all my cash, and then we wanted to stop at one more and saw something for $5 or $10, that we wanted. And I didn't have any more cash on me. And so I said, hey, do you do Venmo? The guy goes, sure, yeah, boom. I scanned something on his phone, and he took it all. Just like that, the $15 was gone from my account into his. And so that's convenient.
It is convenient.
But that's this precursor to what we're looking at. And one thing I wanted to add real quick on this, because sometimes you'll get people who really aren't studying this and that aren't that big into Bible prophecy to begin with. The objection always comes up, well, people have been saying this is this precursor to the mark of the beast for, a century or so. Something's different today, Mondo, and I know you know this, but for our listeners, in the past, the technology that people were pointing out could be setting the stage for some type of beast system was ostensibly being used for other things like QPC codes for tracking inventory and making it easier to check out,
RFID,
or RFID chips. They were for other issues. Now they're actually coming out and saying unapologetically that the CBDCs are intended to control your behavior and control whether you buy or sell. That's precisely what the mark of the beast is described as in Revelation 13.
I think too that one of the things that you talk about in here was just the nature of the agenda and how America and its Constitution, including all the Bill of Rights, stands in the way. Because I encourage people again to read, because there was a book I read just recently. Couple books. One was called The AI Superpowers, and it was about artificial intelligence. And it was about artificial intelligence, but it also brought up that the guy was, he lived in Taiwan, but he was born in China, and he got his PhD in artificial intelligence. I mean, it was amazing. He wasn't a believer, but he was talking about how he visited China in certain areas, and they're already 100% cashless. I mean, 100%. They have the Alibaba app or the Alipay app, whatever. And he said that he went there and he was very surprised because he went there, he was ready to go, and they go, oh, we don't take cash here. And he goes, what? And so he had to download and connect it to his bank. So these things, and it was also the control. He was already impressed by the advancement of China. Now China could do this because they could go into a community and said, within 6 months you're going to be 100% cashless. Well, we don't want to. We don't care. We're dictators here. We're communists. You're going to do what we're going to say, or we'll do it for you, and then you're blacklisted. So they were able to perfect some of these things, and so here he was going. It's amazing how far China is in advance of certain areas of technology.
Oh yeah,
it's there.
Yeah, I mean, in China, if you are caught on cameras, they have cameras everywhere. They're tracking everything, and if you're caught jaywalking, literally before you get to the other side of the street, they've already debited your account
because
for a
of
fine.
facial recognition. Yeah,
Absolutely.
Here we are. Yep.
So yeah, I mean, it's the means of control might be different, as you say there. It's just you have to do this because we're in charge. America, I think it's going to be a little different. And again, we saw this in their dry run with the pandemic. It's what I called, and I picked this up from somebody else, I can't remember who, but early on somebody used this phrase, and I thought that's the perfect description. But they used what's called franchised tyranny. So they subcontracted out the tyrannical control to pastors who turned people away from church and say, no, the government says we can only have 10% occupancy.
Romans 13, we got to obey.
We got to obey. We got to do exactly what the government tells us. They used store managers. You can't shop here if you don't do this. It's franchise tyranny. We're going to control you through others. It's the same thing happened, by the way, after 9/11. The Patriot Act, the see something, say something, spy on your neighbor. And that's right out of the pages of Nazi Germany, spy on your neighbor, tell on your neighbor.
Yeah, you're in the middle of COVID, the neighbor's having a party, a barbecue, call the health department.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Or a guy's out in his, garage lawfully cleaning his shotgun because he just got back from, duck hunting, and the SWAT team shows up, because they say, oh, there's a guy with a gun in my garage, or in his garage. So, yeah, I mean, they will find other ways, peer pressure, like you talked about earlier with language. They'll find, through the carrot, through the stick, through coercion. It won't necessarily be this totalitarian, regime, at least at first. And they'll get a lot of low-hanging fruit that way. They really will.
What I saw, too, was recently in the midst of the last couple of years, lawsuits galore, right? Because all the liberties were being violated. And so in our country, at least presently, lawsuits were filed against over medical reach by whether health departments like Los Angeles, Calvary Chapel out there, even John MacArthur's church, or different states. We were living in Nevada at the time, and Nevada was trying to be like Newsom in California, and so you had this control, but you had the lawsuits that put things on hold. Well, one woman, congresswoman, she said the problem here is the Constitution. The Constitution is outdated, and it's getting in the way of progress. You mentioned earlier that there was a shredding, people were trying to shred. So the problem that we have right now is the liberties that we have, the freedoms that are enshrined in the Bill of Rights. But think about it this way. Allegedly, we have a conservative Supreme Court, 6-3. But in reality, all it takes is 5. If we think about that, all it takes is 5 people to change or legislate from the bench, and it becomes the supreme law of the land. So we saw that really, I would say, from the 60s on, in the sense of more of the liberal Supreme Court that was there, legislating and, again, creating all of a sudden Roe v. Wade, a right to life, which the Constitution doesn't say anything, but they were able to say, no, this is what it says, and therefore it became law somehow. So it takes 5 people, and whether right or wrong, they could say, nope, the government has the right to force you to do this, regardless, and they just turn it upside down in a moment.
Yeah, the whole legal system changed about 100 years ago when it went to a precedent-based system instead of a constitutional-based system. In other words, the Constitution should be sacrosanct. It settles the issue, but instead, as soon as you have one court changing something, then now that becomes the law. Well, then if someone tweaks it a little bit more, now that's the law. And first thing you know, you got to dig pretty deep. And somewhere in there, there's a constitution somewhere. I mean, I heard a lawyer friend of mine said that these days, most law schools don't even require a course in the Constitution. I'm not sure if that's true. I can't imagine it would be true, but I guess in some ways it wouldn't surprise me. But the parallels there between what's happening in the legal system and what's happening in the church with the Bible are very strikingly similar. So in the legal system, really all that should matter is what does the Constitution say? In the church, what should matter is what does the Bible say? But you've got liberal theologians coming along. The technical term for this in academia is the redemptive movement hermeneutic, this idea that, later, the more wise and hip we get to the culture and society.
It's a living, breathing document.
Exactly. Yeah. That's an Al Gore quote. Back in the debates between W. Bush and Gore, if you remember that famous election in 2000, they were asked at a debate.
Are you originalist versus,
and Al Gore famously said, "I believe the Constitution is a living, breathing text." That's, and I've seen some Supreme Court rulings. You can always go to the Supreme Court website and download any of their official rulings. It's got the majority opinion and the dissenting opinion, and they're actually blatantly saying that, well, most civilized countries do it this way now, so we need to come up to speed and do it that way.
They're quoting like laws of Europe.
Yeah, exactly.
Why would we quote laws of Europe? The other thing that we need to recognize is that, again, we have this alleged conservative group. It's kind of irrelevant because with the level of intimidation that we're seeing, I mean, I just saw a picture yesterday, two marshals outside of Brett Kavanaugh's house because there's a protest going down and they're going to the other one. And so the concern I have is these are good people. For the most part, I don't know them, but I imagine I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. But they come and they say, you know what? If you don't rule in a certain way, it's not you that we're going to kill. We're going to take your niece. We're going to take your nephew. We'll kill your child. We know where they live. And so there's this temptation. Or others can be bribed. Or maybe, you go back to The Firm, that movie where they put a situation with Tom Cruise and he compromises, but they did it intentionally. And then now they have something on them. So do they have something on the judges? Or are they going to intimidate them? Or are they going to buy them off? Or physically? It's 5 people. That's all it takes.
Yeah. So, I mean, speaking of conspiracy theories, my view on the Supreme Court's probably a little more nuanced than that. I think they are all controlled, and people that followed our ministry, know that I've spoken about that pretty openly. And by the way, I would encourage folks, and I know you weren't supporting one or the other, you're making an example here, but an illustration. But, I would encourage people, in case of Kavanaugh, do some research. Look at what that guy's background is and kind of some of the things he stood for before. But either way, you're exactly right. It doesn't take much to control people. And the Luciferians are really very good at that. And they can do it through blackmail. They can do it through threats. They can do it through compromise. They know what your weakness is. They get you to pander to your weakness. They get it on camera.
Yep.
And frankly, Mondo, nowadays with AI, it doesn't even have to be real.
No, deep fakes, man. The videos, audios. It's amazing now that they'll take. I don't know the names of these hip hop guys, but they took one rapper and they put another rapper's music with his voice, and it was flawless with the new AI technology.